Happy birthday. We got a lot of birthdays to celebrate on the program. First and foremost, of course, is mine this past week. And one of my associates, Rob Field, his birthday, he's our local Social Security expert at the office. We've got his birthday celebration this past week. But beyond both of those birthdays, we have a big birthday to celebrate, and we'll talk to you about what that was here on the program. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're Central Florida's longest running radio program, coming to you on the News Radio WFLA network, along with 96.9 The Game, and joining us, our new network over on the Space Coast, the folks on 92.7. So we welcome all of those networks to the program. We are Dollars and Cents, of course, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary with Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries stands ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So we mentioned it was my birthday this past week, so yay, happy birthday to me. We mentioned that it was one of our team members, Rob Field. His birthday was also this past week, but most importantly, there was a 125th birthday this past week, and that just happened to be the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So happy birthday to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Turned 125 this past week on May the 26th, to be precise. Back on May the 26th of 1896, the average started out as 12 companies. On that first trading day, the Dow Jones Industrials closed at 40.94, or just under 41. Back then, it did include one of the names that's still around today, that is General Electric. General Electric was the longest component of the Dow until most recently, a few years back, where they moved it out of the Dow. But it certainly has been a company that's been there since the beginning. Other companies have not, like American Cotton Oil and Distilling and Cattle Feeding. Those companies are no longer part of the Dow and no longer viable companies. But at the end of the day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average certainly has evolved with the U.S. economy and has certainly seen its share of headlines, ranging from the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and all of the other myriad of events that have shaped this past century plus in our history. So the interesting thing about the Dow, of course, is that annualized return, okay, in the Dow over the course of the past 125 years, 7.69%. Folks, that in and of itself is a phenomenal testimony to the markets and the consistency and the importance of being consistent as an investor. If you own the Dow and just stayed with it and didn't jump in, jump out, and all the other things that people do when it comes to their money, 7.69%, the 125-year annualized return on the Dow. And it just, when you stop and think about that, boy, I'll tell you, folks get distracted. A lot of distractions going on out there, ranging from cryptocurrency to non-fungible tokens to anything and everything in between. And it's so easy to get distracted, but if you just focus on the things that have been around for the longest, the things that have had staying power, and you look at those annualized returns, it really is a testament to how investing and ultimately how the market works. So 7.69%, the 125-year annualized return of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Not much out there that can boost that comparable type of backdrop, to have gone through all that it has gone through and still generate those kinds of returns. It kind of makes me snicker a little bit. We talked a little bit about this a couple weeks on the program. Those folks that say, oh, well, cryptocurrency, I'm going to get into that because that's going to be a great inflation hedge. The reality is that cryptocurrency hasn't even been around during an inflationary period. So I'm not sure how you come to that conclusion. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average seen inflation, seen lack of inflation, seen world wars, seen attacks on this country, seen depressions, recessions, and everything in between. It broke above 100 in 1906. It topped 1,000 in 1972. It crossed 10,000 in 1999. Today it sits at about 34,000. So just an amazing birthday that really bears some focus and attention, especially hitting the 125-year mark for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So most importantly, happy birthday to the Dow. Certainly an impressive 125-year track record for sure. So some interesting stuff. Also on the program today, we're going to be talking about some tips to retiring rich without making yourself miserable, I guess, along the way. Oftentimes people think about, oh, if I'm going to save money, I've got to really, count the pennies and not have any fun along the way. The reality is that there is a big push towards let's enjoy life now, and that's always a good trade-off. But we've got some tips for you to try and retire rich without making yourself too miserable along the way. And then it's wedding season, right? So this time of year, a lot of folks getting married. We thought we would also spend some time talking about the do's and don'ts of combining finances with your partner. So those are some of the things that we're going to hit on the program this week, along with an interesting study about how to increase your net worth. So let's start with that one, because in order to increase your net worth, it obviously is incumbent upon you to understand exactly what goes into making up your net worth. And so what folks have to realize is that your net worth is simply your assets. At its core, net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. It's a great way to sort of assess your overall financial picture. And there's some ways to increase your net worth that you're certainly going to want to pay attention to in this segment of the program. So if your net worth is assets minus liabilities, one of the easiest ways to improve your net worth is to reduce down the amount that is subtracting from the assets. So that would be the liability side. So the notion of improving your net worth starts with trying to reduce down your debt, your liabilities, if you will, and go through the process of paying off that debt. Now, how do you do that? Well, maybe that means that you refinance the mortgage that you have into a lower rate or a shorter period of time and to get that paid off. Or maybe you look at doing some level of consolidation as well, combining some other debt, maybe getting that all packaged into something with a lower rate. And ultimately you wind up having a better, faster way to pay off the debt side of it. So that's the sort of the liability side of the net worth. We're going to take a break. When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about some of the ways to improve the asset side as well. So ultimately getting to a better net worth picture. Coming up next on the program here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris. Understanding how to improve your net worth starts with an understanding of what is involved in net worth, right? Assets, at its core, net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. In the prior segment, we were talking about ways in which to improve sort of the liability side, right? The liability side is the subtraction side. And so consequently, if you can eliminate the subtraction part of the net worth calculation, then obviously you can make some great strides to increase your net worth along the way. And so we talked about maybe refinancing, consolidating debt. as some ways to get better off or improve the liability side of the net worth equation. Now we turn our attention to the asset side, because certainly increasing the asset side on your net worth is a great way to improve your net worth. And so one of the ways in which to do that would be to maximizing out your retirement contributions. One of the things about retirement contributions is typically they come with some tax savings, which allows you to get a little bit of an extra benefit to doing those contributions. And then if you have an employer plan, then you could certainly also be getting an employer match as well. So those are some great reasons beyond just improving your asset picture, improving your net worth. But if you are making those retirement contributions, you may find that you're saving on your taxes now, so that obviously helps with money now. And in particular, if you have an employer who still does some kind of a match, then certainly being able to do that match on the employer side is an extra benefit as well. Next up, to try and improve the asset side of this net worth picture, is a suggestion that we've certainly made many times before on the program. That is to pay yourself first. If you pay yourself first, then that means that you're not paying yourself last. And oftentimes when people save, they say, oh, well, I'll save with whatever money that I have left over at the end of the month after I pay all my bills. Okay, that's the part that I'm going to take and I'm going to save. And the reality is that it just does not work that way, because what happens is, like most people at the end of the month, then you don't have any money left over because you've spent it all on bills or you spent it all on extra stuff. And the reality is that if you pay yourself first, though, that means you're taking that before you wind up sort of spending it during the course of the month and ultimately saving that. So that's a good way. Paying yourself first is a great concept to increase the asset side as well. Cutting expenses, of course, is another good one. How do you cut expenses? Well, the easiest way to do that is to know what you're spending money on, and that means that you're tracking expenses. Now, oftentimes people get scared about the B word, the budget word, but certainly budgeting is a great way to be able to keep track of those expenses. If that seems too intimidating, let me maybe break it down to a simpler exercise that would allow you to kind of keep track of the expenses, and then that usually shows you opportunities to cut those expenses. Is just simply keep track of your expenses for a week. Don't try it necessarily for a month, although if you can, fantastic. But just for a week, and ultimately keep track of those expenses, of every dollar that you spend during the course of the week, and ultimately that will allow you to at least have some level of insight into how you are spending the money. So certainly that's a good way to improve on the asset side of things. And then lastly, like we were talking about in the prior segment, Dow Jones Industrial celebrating its 125th birthday, and during the 125 years, an annualized return of 7.69%. That's pretty good through all periods of inflation and recession and depression and world wars and everything, pandemics and everything in between. And I guess that's the other way to make sure that your asset side is growing or doing as well as it can, is to make sure that the money that you have saved, keep it in places where it's going to grow. One of the things that a lot of folks I think are struggling out there right now with today is that savings rates are so incredibly low that there's no way to make any level of a return on those savings today. And so if you're looking to increase or improve your assets, then you've got to have your savings invested in places where, in fact, it'll grow. Otherwise, it will wind up just kind of languishing and not really growing at the rate that you would like it to. Because understand that if you're trying to improve your overall net worth, right, then you've got to ultimately grow that asset side. And the only way you get growth is by making sure that you're saving it in places where you're going to get growth and not just a negligible return. And then lastly, thinking about the asset side and how to improve your net worth is buy a car and plan to drive it for as long as possible. I think that's one of the hidden ways of hidden wealth erosions that happen in America today, is this constant trading in of cars every 3 or 4 years. The reality is you buy a car, you hold on to it for 10, 12 years. Look, most cars these days will certainly last that. They're built that way. The reality is that's a great way to make sure that your asset picture stays strong, because when you buy a car over time, that is something whose value is going to go down. But if you constantly are buying or leasing or borrowing money to buy cars, then ultimately that does serve to undermine your overall asset picture. So some tips there to increase your net worth and improve it. Obviously, net worth starts with understanding what the formula is to determine one's net worth, and that is simply assets minus liability. So you've got two pieces of that to focus on. On the liability side, it's about consolidating debt, it's about reducing interest rates, it's about accelerating the time frame in which that debt is paid off, and that's a great way then to improve your net worth. On the other side of the equation, improving your net worth is also about improving the asset mix that you have, or the amount of assets that you have. And we've given you some examples in this segment of how to do that. To recap those, maximizing out your retirement contributions gives you the double benefit of getting some tax savings now, and also to the extent you're working for an employer who's got a match, then you can also pick up that match as well. Number two, paying yourself first. Far too many people pay themselves last. At the end of the month, after all the expenses, whatever leftover money, that's the amount that I'm going to save. Get out of that mindset. Pay yourself first. Take that right off the top, and ultimately, it is not money that you would see. And then number three, cutting the expenses by keeping track of your expenses is a great way to help minimize and reduce down the expenses, and because by tracking them, you're able to identify where that money is spent. And it'd be great to do it for a long period of time, but if you can just do it for a week, I think a week will be insightful for many folks to be able to get a handle on their expenses. And then next, make sure that the assets that you do have, that you are saving for the future, that they are invested where they need to be growing, and not just sitting in cash, or not sitting in investments that don't generate much of a return. You want those assets invested in such a way that they're going to grow. And then lastly, on the car side of things, buy that car, stick with it, live with it, and ultimately that will get you a better overall asset picture. So those are just some of the tips in which to how to improve your net worth. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to continue the conversation on some of the ways in which you can retire rich without making yourself miserable along the way. Coming up next here on the program, Dollars and Cents. So it's wedding season out there, and probably a busier wedding season than most, right? Because a lot of weddings got canceled thanks to the pandemic, and so there's a bit of a backlog that's been building, if you will, over the course of the past 15 months. So we thought it would be good in this segment of the program to talk with you a little bit about some of the do's and don'ts, if you will, of combining finances with your partner. So that's what we'll be covering here in this segment of the program. Welcome, of course, to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're Central Florida's longest running radio program, coming to you on the News Radio WFLA Orlando network, along with 96.9 The Game, and then of course over on the Space Coast we're on 92.7 WMMB. We're also one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web, so make sure you check us out on your favorite podcast channel of choice. And then of course we are Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary. Our team of certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning stands ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So what are some of those things? Wedding season, right, coming up. A lot of backlog about from weddings during the course of the pandemic that got canceled or delayed. The reality is we've got some do's and don'ts in terms of combining finances with your partner. So I guess it starts with the big do, which is that you've got to eventually have the conversation of putting the cards on the table, if you will. Show them what you're working with, what you've got in the bank, what you've got for credit card debt, what you've got for student loans, what your income is, what your credit score is, what your 401k. All of that financial disclosure stuff would be something that you would want to get on the table with your partner. Remember, you're on the same team now. And so ultimately, you want to make sure that that team is working together as best it can. Team really can't work that well together unless it is sharing information or all parts of information about one's finances. So make sure that you've got to have that conversation, that disclosure conversation, if you will. Ultimately, it's extremely common for a young couple. Someone's going to have some student loan debt. Someone's going to have some credit card debt. Someone's going to have a credit score that may not be the best. Those are the things to kind of get on the table, to know what you're working with, so you guys can work together to ultimately get into better financial shape. As you have the disclosure meeting, don't blame or judge, right? We've all made stupid financial decisions in our lifetime. Work with each other, have compassion for each other, and really try to not focus on, one versus the other or anything like that, but make sure that you are having an open conversation about money habits, about goals, and ultimately helping to develop a better sense of trust and relationship among you. That's one of the reasons why we recommend books by Dave Ramsey all the time here at the office. Matter of fact, we actually keep a copy of his books here in the office, so that if it's a young couple or if someone just starting out on their financial path, that we like to give them a copy of one of Dave Ramsey's books, because we do think that he does outline a lot of things that couples can do together to try and get on the same page financially. So some good resources there, and certainly one that when folks come into the office for the first time, we're happy to share as well. Because the reality is that the decisions you make as a married couple are going to affect your finances for the rest of your life. Because after all, if you're getting married, you're hoping that it's going to last the rest of your life. So the debt you accrue as a married couple becomes both of your debt. So ignoring that stuff early on only leads to less financial security later on in life. So another do, if you will, is to make sure that you budget. We talked a little bit about that last time in terms of means of increasing your net worth. Certainly being able to budget and ultimately utilize a budget to help keep track of expenses. That's a good way to also have a conversation about what your goals are, and what's important to you may be different than what's important to your spouse. These days, there's a lot of ways to make that tracking of expenses more easy. because of the budgeting apps and programs and things like that are out there. And then don't nickel and dime it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're both in this together. You've got to kind of have some shared goals. That's probably on the list of do's, if you will. Do have some shared goals, because ultimately the exercise of say budgeting is much more intriguing, or I guess interesting, if you have someone to talk about it and talk about it through. You can talk about the successes and you can talk about the shortcomings and how to improve those, but certainly being able to engage in those conversations along the way are some great things to be able to do in terms of having sort of some do's and don'ts, if you will, particularly during the course of wedding season, in terms of trying to get your finances on good solid footing as the two of you join together and become a team, if you will. And certainly it's better if the team is working together to accomplish those financial goals rather than each of you working independently. So certainly some interesting tips for our soon-to-be married couples out there. There's more of them right now than ever before, because a lot of those weddings didn't take place over the course of the past 15 months with the pandemic. So some do's and don'ts, if you will, for how best to combine finances with your partner. Speaking of other things to do, we've got some tips on how to retire rich without making yourself miserable along the way. You know, one of the things that many folks kind of do or dread, if you will, when it comes to improving their finances is that ultimately they think it's going to be a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, and ultimately not having much fun along the way. And obviously it's important in life, as with anything, whether it's your finances or anything in life, to try and strike the right balance between today and tomorrow, between saving now versus spending now, because you don't want to never go out to dinner or something like that. But at the end of the day, if you're going out every night, well, then that means you're not going to have as much money for retirement. So as always, it's important to kind of strike that balance. So we've got some things to think about that you can focus on, and ultimately to help you sort of strike that balance and retire well without making yourself miserable along the way. And so the concept starts with looking at the one large expense. So if you think about how you spend money, then there has to be one thing that ultimately is a much bigger expense than anything else. Or maybe there's two or three, but anyway, you know, if you look at those expenses, that one large expense, then ultimately that could be a great way to make a change without significantly changing your approach to how you're tackling your finances. So if you think of it this way, you find that significant expense, so let's say it's housing or something like that, that would be the way to kind of focus on that one large expense. We got two or three other tips here that we want to give as well in terms of how to retire rich without making yourself miserable along the way. But we'll take a break. When we come back, we will continue that part of the conversation here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about some tips to retire rich without making yourself miserable along the way. Way too many people think of the notion of saving for retirement or saving for the future as just not able to have a lot of fun. I have to sacrifice. I have to do with less. I have to do, you know, all these hard things in order to have money later on. I'm not going to bother to do it. Well, we're going to, on the program, we're talking about three ways in which you can kind of just adjust things a little bit in order to improve things dramatically over time. And so we talked a little bit about it in the prior segment, but the first thing to look at is sort of look at trying to reduce that one large expense. We all have larger expenses that we spend money on, whether that's housing or eating out or whatever the case may be, but focus on kind of that one large expense and look for ways to reduce that. So maybe that's not quite getting the 4,000 square foot house. Maybe that's getting the 3,000 square foot house, and ultimately using that as a way to reduce down that expense item, and ultimately then that means you're able to put more money away for the future. So those are some of the things in which to certainly focus on along the way, and certainly be able to try and use that to ultimately improve your finances now, reduce those expenses now, so that ultimately you can have more money in the future. We got a couple more tips as well in terms of being able to retire well without being miserable along the way, but we want to welcome all of our listeners in on the various networks. This is, of course, Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We welcome our listeners throughout Central Florida, whether you're listening to us on News Radio Orlando or 96.9 The Game, or our latest edition over on the Space Coast, 92.7 WMMV. We also welcome our podcast listeners as well. We're one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web, with over, 16,000, 17,000 downloads of the program over the course of our podcast history. So got some exciting stuff going on, multiple networks. So feel free to connect with us on your favorite social media platform of choice. To locate us, just go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning. Upper right hand corner, you'll find a bunch of icons. Click on the one that looks most familiar to you, and you'll get connected to our channels. Or if you're on those sites, you can certainly search for our channels by looking up Nelson Financial Planning. My name is, of course, Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary with Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciaries stands ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So what are some of the other things that you can do to try and retire well without having to sacrifice as much along the way? Well, the power of starting early comes very much into play, right? If you start saving early at an early age, time really becomes your greatest weapon. And we want to give you some specific numbers on this. So imagine you start saving $500 per month at the age of 25, and you plan to retire at the age of 65. So $500 a month, okay? Started at the age of 25, you do it all the way through to age 65, assuming an 8% return, which, in our world is a pretty reasonable assumption given the 125th anniversary or birthday of the Dow Jones Industrial Average that happened this past week. And lo and behold, what's the annualized return over that 125-year period of time? It's 7.69%. I think that's pretty close to 8%. So a fair enough assumption in this 40-year hypothetical of starting at age 25, saving $500 a month. By the time you reach age 65, you wind up with over 1.5 million. Folks, that's the power, that's the eighth wonder of the world, if you will, that we talk about in our latest blog post on our website at nelsonfinancialplanning.com. The eighth wonder of the world you need to know about. That's the power of compounding, and how that works in for your investments is dramatic, because when you talk about compounding and how that works, think of the simple example of, well, if I have $10, right, invested, and it makes 10%, well, then that means at the end of year one, that $10 turns into 11. But what happens then the next year is the next year I make another 10% because of compound growth. I'm not starting at $10, I'm now starting at $11. So then I make 10% on the $11. Well, shoot, now I made a $1.10 rather than just the dollar. And as you spin that out over the course of an extended time period, then those numbers obviously really do accelerate much more dramatically. Hence, that's one of the reasons why we refer to it, along with others as well, the eighth wonder of the world you need to know about. So make sure you check out our blog post getting into great detail about that topic. But the reality is that that's one of the biggest ways that you can retire well without having to be miserable along the way, is simply by starting early. Similarly, and this will be sort of the last item, and we talked a little bit about this in the segment where we were talking about improving your net worth, but you've got to go heavy on the stock side. Being light on the stock side will be to your detriment. Let's go back to that example of the 25-year-old saving $500 a month all the way up to 65. Let's say he stays predominantly on the bond side, and his return is only 5% instead of 8%. And you may say, well, 5 versus 8, that can't be that much. The reality is it's almost $1 million. So if the 25-year-old that's saving $500 a month and does that all the way up to age 65, and he has $1.5 million, assuming an 8% return, which would be the return of, say, for example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, then you compare that to someone who's only got a return of 5%. Again, same scenario, start at age 25, put $500 a month in all the way up to 65. Guess what? They've only got $570,000 after those 40 years. So the difference of that 3% can really add up, particularly when you consider the power of compounding that eighth wonder of the world. So the bottom line is, though, in order to make sure that you retire well, you've got to have an allocation that is heavy on the stock side. And unfortunately, a lot of people will move more away from stocks. There's a lot of ways in which to get distracted or from a variety of different concepts, because there's always something new and shiny out there, right? And the reality is that you've got to stay consistent on that stock side. You've got to have a heavier allocation to the stock side. Yes, it can be volatile, and that's one of the things that ultimately people get concerned about. But ultimately, over time, that volatility starts to smooth itself out. And when you look at the comparable returns over time, there is no better allocation to be heavy on the stock side of things. And whether that's buying individual stocks or mutual funds or ETFs or indexes, that is a conversation for a different program. The reality is, and we've certainly done those programs before anyway, we'll do them in the future, but the point is that to make sure that when you look at your overall allocation, that it is heavier on the stock side of things and not so on the bond side. Yes, there's some additional volatility, but at the end of the day, that's a pretty significant difference in terms of the amount of wealth that you accumulate over time. If you just look at those two examples that we've given you about the 25, that does $500 a month until age 65, assuming an 8% return, which would be similar to what the stock market's done over the past 125 years. Well, guess what? That means you've got $1.5 million. You do 5% on that. That means you've only got about $570,000. So $1 million difference in the example we've given you. Anyway, we're going to wrap it on up and get on out of here. Thanks for listening to the program. This has been Dollars and Cents with your host, Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning.